Welcome back to the channel, you curd nerds. We're on to the next episode of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, where we break down the PHAC Barney style for you so you can get all the vital information that you need out of the PHAC while you're probably driving to your flight lesson. Because let's be honest, your instructor last night probably told you to study, all right, or on your last lesson, probably told you to study something, probably told you to read about the 4 forces of flight. What is this, chapter 4? No, chapter 5, right? It's the beginning of chapter 5, the 4 forces of flight. Your instructor was like, hey, I need you to read this. I need you to study this so that you can have this information for the next lesson. And you went, well, I got other things going on. I got to go to Air Adventure. I got to go to Sun and Fun. I want to go walk through the cheese aisle in Wisconsin because they got 400 different kinds of cheeses, and I want to try all of them. And then since your belly doesn't like cheese that much, you spent a lot of time in the bathroom, and you probably could have tucked the PHAC in there, but then you didn't because it's kind of gross to. Either way, you didn't study, and now you're sitting here listening to me rattle and prattle on about the 4 forces of flight, and hopefully you get the information that you need and a couple giggles out of it as well. But before we dig into what I got going on back here, I do want to say thank you to all you viewers and whatnot, viewers, listeners, etc., for viewing and watching and listening. It really does mean a lot. I really do appreciate it. I really do enjoy making these videos. I really want to make sure that y'all get the information that you need so you can be better, safer pilots and more efficiently finish your training and go on to the really fun stuff in aviation. You know, get into that big jet that you really want to do. Go buy your own airplane, go on adventures with all your buddies and stuff like that. So I really do appreciate all of y'all watching. If you do have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I read all of them, mainly because there's not many to read. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll try to answer them in any of these episodes. All right? I absolutely love helping y'all become better, safer pilots. But let's get into the 4 forces of flight. We're going to dig into these things deeper than I dig into a 4 cheese dip at a Packers tailgate party. So right off the bat, we've got thrust, lift, weight, drag. All right? Thrust needs to be equal to drag, and weight needs to be equal to lift if we want to be in straight and level unaccelerated flight, which is where we're going to spend 90% of our time as pilots once we're done with all of our training. Of course, as we're going through training, we are not in straight and level flight. If we're in straight and level flight, we are burning gas and wasting money, right? We need to be training. But for us to be in straight and level unaccelerated flight, thrust needs to be equal to drag, weight needs to be equal to lift. So if we have 100 pounds of thrust, we need 100 pounds of drag. If we have 3,000 pounds of weight, we need 3,000 pounds of lift. Now, of course, this is somewhat of an oversimplification of the relationship of all of these. You know, if we point an airplane up into the air like you see at EAA Air Venture, you know, them hanging off of the propellers, obviously thrust is now opposing weight, and we're not necessarily using the wing to generate lift. But let's be honest, a propeller, it's really just a wing that's doing little spinny bits. So for the simplification of this lesson, and for you going through training, if thrust equals drag and weight equals lift, we are in straight and level unaccelerated flight. So let's talk about thrust right off the bat. How do we generate thrust? Humans, we really haven't figured out a way to generate any form of forward locomotion. We don't have the Albuquerque drive, we don't have faster than light travel or anything like that, no rainbow drives or anything like that. The only way we've ever figured out to move things forward is by yeeting stuff out the back of whatever vessel we are in, right? If we're in a boat, the propeller is just yeeting water out the back. If we're in a car, we're just yeeting road out of the back of the tires. If we're in an airplane, we are using either a spinning blade, like a propeller, a turbofan, or a turbojet, or the rapidly expansion of gases, yeeting out the tail of the airplane to move us forward. Now, in your training aircraft, let's talk about how we generate this thrust in your training aircraft, because that's a little bit more important to you right now. Once you start getting into jets and stuff like that, ask your instructor then, or maybe I'll make some jet videos. But thrust from our training airplane is generated by our power plant. Now, when we're talking about power plant, we're talking about the engine, whatever kind of gearbox might be associated with it, along with the propeller. Now, most general aviation airplanes are going to be using a piston-driven airplane. They're going to be using either a Lycoming or a Continental or even a Rotax engine, where it's pistons moving up and down in cylinders. And let's talk about that. Let's draw the picture out. Let's draw a little engine and talk about how we actually generate that power to generate thrust. And again, this is going to be an oversimplification because we do have a chapter specifically on systems that we're going to get into. So we've got, let me find a black marker. We've got our cylinder. Okay, when you're doing your pre-flight, you might see this. It's got all the fins and stuff on the sides, right? Now inside this cylinder, you've got a piston. This piston has a connecting rod that connects down to a crankshaft. This crankshaft is like an off-center throw that then rotates around, and the propeller is actually connected to it right about here at the center of our crankshaft. So as the engine rotates, this piston goes down and up, and it goes through 4 different strokes. And we're going to erase this, and we're going to draw out those 4 different strokes. We've got our intake, our compression, our combustion or power stroke, and our exhaust stroke. We call these the suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Okay, so we got our cylinders. Right. So as the piston moves down, okay, so we're kind of starting at the top. As the piston moves down, we've got an intake valve that has now opened with an exhaust valve that is closed. As that intake valve opens and the piston moves down, we start sucking in our fresh air and fuel mixture, and the piston goes all the way down to the bottom. Now, once it gets to the bottom, it's going to start moving up. At this point, our intake and exhaust valve are both going to be closed, and it's going to be compressing this fuel and air mixture that's in here. Once it reaches the top, we are then going to have this really tiny combustion chamber where the intake and exhaust valves are both closed, and our spark plug is going to ignite this mixture and start moving the piston down. This is going to be our power stroke. This is where we actually get the combustion. This is where we get the power to swing the propeller around. And then once it gets down to the bottom, it's going to start moving its way back up with the intake valve closed, the exhaust valve open, so that the exhaust can leave the engine. And this happens 4 times every time the engine rotates around in most cases, because most of your training airplane are going to be 4-cylinder, right? If you got a 6-cylinder, it's going to happen 6 times. You got an 8-cylinder, it's going to happen 8 times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But most of your engines are going to be 4-cylinder, 320s, 360s. We'll learn more about it when we get into systems. But this is the basis of how we're generating power. Now, these pistons are connected directly to your crankshaft, and this crankshaft is very often connected directly to the propeller. Some smaller Rotax engines, you know, that usually, sometimes they only have like 2 cylinders. There's a little gearbox that they're connected to, and then that gearbox is then connected to your propeller. But the fact that somehow we're transmitting this power, this combustion, this axial combustion to rotating power at the propeller. Now, how does the propeller actually generate thrust? How does the propeller use this power? You know, it's because, well, the shape of the propeller. So let's erase all of this nonsense, and we're going to draw a propeller. And what you're going to notice is this propeller is going to look kind of familiar, because we're going to draw a little bit of a cross section of this propeller. Now, this cross section, I hope you recognize it from one of the previous episodes, because we've kind of drawn this picture before. It looks something like that. I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. It's a wing. It's a wing, that's all it is, right? So as our propeller is getting swung by the engine, let's say this direction, we have this relative air coming at this wing. This wing now has an angle of attack, and it's also got the appropriate shape to work with Bernoulli's principle, and that's really how we generate thrust. That's it. It's just a wing turned on its side, bolted to your crankshaft, spinning through the air at 2,500 RPM. It's that simple. See, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It really, really, really does not have to be that complicated. Now, there's a couple weird things about a propeller, because as you go from the hub of the propeller all the way out, you'll notice it starts kind of steep right here. Let's say that this cross section is from right here. And then as we get farther and farther out, we'll notice it starts to flatten out and maybe even get a little bit narrower. Now, why do we do this? Why do we have the hub be steeper or have a greater angle of attack than the tip? Well, it's because this thing is rotating around. And since it's a solid object, since this is a smaller circle than this has to be moving faster. And if you remember from a few episodes ago, if a lifting force, or a lifting object, right, like a wing, is moving faster, it's going to start to generate more lift. So if we didn't make it shallower as it got closer and closer to the tip, we would end up generating a whole lot more thrust at the tip of the blade than at the root of the blade, causing this bending force on the blade, very likely snapping the blade. Okay, so that's why props aren't flat. That's why they're twisted. Right? Does that make sense? So that's really how you in your training aircraft are going to generate thrust. If you're really curious about how turbines generate thrust, or turbine-powered, like turbofans, turbojets, turboprops, if you're really curious about it, let me know in the comments, and we'll do a little offshoot episode where we cover that. But for now, it's not really vital to you. It's not really important to you in your training right now. But once you start training in jets, obviously. Now, next one we're going to talk about is drag. And we're going to talk about that in reference to a wing. Okay? So if we've got a wing moving through the air, and it's got an angle of attack, we will be generating induced drag. So remember, chord line, relative wind, angle of attack. Induced drag is just a side effect of the generation of lift. That's it. That's all you really got to remember. The more lift you're generating, the more drag you're generating. So we can even draw like a little bit of a graph right here. And as the airplane is flying, let's put speed down here at the bottom. Let's put speed down here at the bottom. Let's put drag over here. So as we're flying at low speeds, we're going to have some fairly high induced drag because we're asking a lot of the wing. But as we increase our speed, we know that the wing's going to generate more lift as a result of Bernoulli's principle as we continue to increase that speed. So we can see our drag profile is going down. But remember, we've got parasitic drag as well. And parasitic drag increases with the square of the frontal area and the speed and blah, blah, blah. We don't need to learn all of that, okay? We just need to know that parasitic drag increases as we increase the speed of our airplane. So we start with, let's say, our parasitic drag way down here because we don't have a whole lot of speed, right? And as we speed the airplane up, it gets more and more and more until we eventually reach, like, let's say, our top speed or, the structural cruising limit of the aircraft. Now, you notice these things crossed at a certain point. These things crossed at a certain point, didn't they? There's a lot of really important things that happen at this point. This is going to be our lowest drag point, very often referred to as our LD max, or our lift over drag. Since it's our lowest point of drag, and again, in most airplanes, right, lift is also going to be pretty the ratio between lift to drag is going to be pretty wide at this point, because we know as we increase our speed, our lift is going to go up. Right? We could even draw like another little graph right here showing us that right around that point is going to be our LD max. This is our lift, our total drag curve right here. And then we have getting a little too deep into this. Lowest drag point is where the parasitic drag and the induced drag crossover, and that's usually going to be where your best glide is going to happen, because again, we're generating the least amount of drag at this point. We're making the wing as efficient as possible so that we can glide for as long as possible. So if we were to look at like our Cessna 172 POH with our glide speed of 68, it's probably because we're right around our LD max. We're right around our lowest drag point at around 68 knots. Okay, so remember, as we increase speed, our parasitic drag goes up. As we increase speed, our induced drag goes down. Mainly, it's more of like as we reduce our angle of attack, we end up having less and less drag from the induction of lift, and we have our lowest drag point. Next up is really just going to be our lift and weight. Lift, it's pretty straightforward. We talked about lift before in the previous episodes. We got two ways that we generate lift. We got two ways that we talk about how we generate lift, right? We've got Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal yet opposite reaction. So as we have relative wind hitting the bottom of the wing, the fact that the wind got deflected down means it's pushing the wing up. And then we've got Bernoulli's principle. So as air hits the wing, it causes a restriction. That restriction causes an increase in velocity and a drop in pressure. This drop in pressure is relative to the pressure underneath the airplane, meaning that this higher pressure down here, this higher pressure down here is going to end up pushing the wing up as well. Now, when we generate lift, we, as we said, cause induced drag. Now, some of the induced drag is caused by the fact that Newton's third law, we've got that big old like barn door pushing into the wind. The other part of it is vortex generation or wingtip vortices. So let's go ahead and, you know what? I think we're going to use the airplane as an example, since we do have the airplane in here. So uno momento as we shift view. All right, so here we are, we're at the wingtip of the airplane. So we know when we generate lift, right? Bernoulli's principle means that we're gonna have lower pressure up here and higher pressure down here on the bottom of the wing. Now, once we get to the tip of the wing, these pressures, they want to meet each other. They want to equalize. So what ends up happening is we get all this high pressure underneath the wing. It wants to spill out on top of the wing. And look what it does. It spills out and drags its way off of the back of the wing. It generates a bunch of lift, a bunch of high pressure, a bunch of low pressure up here. High pressure is like, no, I want to go meet my friend up there on the top of the wing. Low pressure, ah! And they meet and drag their way down the tip of the wing. That is induced drag, right? So it's not just the fact that we've got that big old barn door pushing into the wind when we have that high angle of attack, but also Bernoulli's principle, the generation of lift. We end up having that stuff smack the top of the wing. Now, we do have kind of a little trick, kind of a little cheat on getting rid of that bit of induced drag, and it's actually called ground effect. Now, ground effect really just means that if I'm within one wingspan of the ground, this high pressure isn't going to have enough time to come out here and smack the top of the wing. It's actually going to be kind of squished by the ground and get pushed out here, and these little vortexes are going to end up out there as opposed to smacking the top of the wing. So we end up having a whole lot of reduction in drag, meaning that we can accelerate faster, right? So when you go to practice things like soft field takeoffs, you're going to notice you're going to pop up and stay in ground effect, and you can accelerate a whole lot quicker. Or if you've already done a few landings in your training aircraft, you might notice once you get close to the ground, the airplane seems to not want to slow down anymore. The airplane seems to all of a sudden have a whole lot more lift. Well, it's because once you get into this ground effect area, when you're within one wingspan length of the ground, all those vortices just end up getting squished out and pushed out into nowhere. Now, this doesn't mean, we'll talk about these vortices in relation to other aircraft and how to keep yourself safe in other episodes, but that's really how we're generating lift. Let's talk about weight, and we'll finish up the episode. Now, weight. It's that simple. It goes through the center of gravity of the aircraft, which we'll talk about center of gravity, because that's a whole nother kit and caboodle kind of subject. But just know that weight opposes the lift kind of perpendicular to the direction of travel in straight and level flight. If we are climbing, lift is now still opposite, or correction, weight is now still opposite of lift, but now it's also opposing our thrust as well, because now we have this weird vector. If we were to draw like our airplane, right? I'm gonna get better at drawing airplanes one of these days. It's only been a decade of me drawing airplanes. You'd think I could draw a damn airplane by now. There we go. Right, so if we start pointing this thing up, we now have our weight vector, which is now opposing a little bit of our thrust. Weight, it's weight. It pulls you down to the center of the planet. If this is news that the planet's round, sorry, it's news, but the planet's round. Weight pulls you down to the center of the planet. Now, I hope this wasn't kind of too brief. I know this episode, it's the 4 forces of flight. They're pretty straightforward. You got lift, thrust, weight, and drag. If drag and thrust are equal and weight and lift are equal, congratulations, we're in straight and level unaccelerated flight. For us to climb, lift has to be greater than weight. When we start generating more lift, we generate more drag, so we need more thrust to counteract that drag. When we want to descend, lift needs to be less than weight. I think that probably, I've never left one up there, so it's always been the case for me, that weight always ends up more than lift at some point. But when we end up having weight be more than lift, now we're generating less drag, so now we need less thrust. You can see how they all kind of work together and play together. And we're going to get into more detail into that once we talk about moments, CGs, and stability. And that's what we're going to cover in the next episode. So thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer all of them. I absolutely love teaching. That's why I'm literally sweating bullets as I sit in my hangar teaching to a camera. So I really hope you all enjoy these things. I really hope that they help you get all the information that you need out of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. And as always, fly safe and keep it cheesy.